Friday, May 31st of 2024. The time is 11:35 a.m. Mr. Macy, can you please call us to order?
Brown.
Here.
Short.
Here.
Mayor Box.
Here. Item number 1 under general business. Review of revenues and expenditures and transfers and any accounts or related issues pertaining to the fiscal year 2024 to 2026 biennial budget. Who is going to open for us?
Mayor and all members of council, we're in a unique situation in that we've seen sales at retail establishments over the last year start to flatline. We've had, I think, an average of something like 8 to 9% increase in sales taxes over the last 10 years. I think that everyone spent a lot of money coming out of COVID. I think they've spent all their money, and right now we're seeing a pullback as it relates to high interest rates and previous expenditures by households over the last couple of years. And so although we're flat this year, we anticipate an increase from the outlet mall conservatively of $2.5 million in sales taxes. We did a calculation where they're going to open August 15th. I think we assumed a 75% occupancy rate and then took a very conservative average of their price per square foot sales at other locations, reduced that, and then came to a number that I think is close to 71 million in sales in next fiscal year. And so that brings us to $2.5 million in an increase in sales taxes. We, for everything else within the city, budgeted do you remember off the top of your head how much increase? 0.5%? Yeah, 0.5% increase throughout the city otherwise. And I think that we're trying to be as conservative as possible with our revenue projections so that we don't get caught having more operational costs than we have revenue coming in. And so with that, I think the key points for this budget are we are budgeting a 6% pay increase for all employees. We have included 5 new police officers and the expenses to equip those police officers. We've included 6 new fire department personnel. We also were awarded the SAFER grant, which will reimburse us something like $460,000 a year for those 6 new personnel expenses. In addition to that, we increased the franchise fees revenue based on current performance. We decreased the interest revenue based on current invested dollars, and we increased the transfer to JPWA based on the outlet malls revenue that they'll be collecting. So we also increased the maintenance and operations budget by $650,000 related to the increased cost of doing business as it relates to inflation. And we have the master fee schedule included here. And we stated at the time it would be reviewed every year, so we're including it. And that draft is highlighted in orange. So those are really the highlights of this current budget. Everything else basically is staying the same. We increased some areas, but adding the 5 police officers, adding the 6 firefighters, offering a 6% cost of living adjustment to all employees are the main cost increases related to this budget for the city of Jenks. If you have any questions on the line items, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Strout. We'll go ahead and keep this fluid for the sake of time. We'll start with you, Mr. Well, I don't know if you had any time to prepare, but we'll start with you, Mr. Short. Anything you want to highlight, or do you want to actually go through these? Any questions on any of these bullets?
Not
Well, yes, but not anything major. So, Chris, can you help us understand? I mean, you outlined very clearly kind of how you came up with the impact of Simon. I'm assuming they gave you some numbers and we pared those numbers down a little bit just for conservative purposes. That's a fair assessment?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, they gave us what we viewed as conservative numbers. We then made them even more conservative. We do have, it's proprietary, but we have the sales at the most recently opened outlet mall in the country, which would be the Denver Premium Outlets in Thornton, Colorado. And I think I can say that we are significantly more conservative in our sales per square foot than that mall.
The only two line item questions I have, on the franchise fees, the actuals in '23,
Page are you on, Kevin?
first, page
I'm
4.
sorry, Mr. Short, excuse me. Page 4,
Yeah.
okay.
Row 10. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not 10. 4060, the account number. We had $1,533,000 in actual. Can you help us understand the delta, the difference between, that happened in actual through May 31st, or, sorry, March 31st of this fiscal year, the $1,000,001? We were projecting $1,000,003 for the budget.
Well, I believe we, through March 31st, would be 80% of the way
Okay.
through the year. And a lot of those franchise fees would be associated with PSO, which doesn't start to ramp up until it starts to get hot, which would be, April, May, June. And so our thought was, we're going to exceed what we budgeted. Yeah, the 1.2. So we're, I think, being
Good.
ultra conservative, just budgeting 1.3. I think we're going to easily exceed the 1.3.
And how does Simon have an impact on that number, on that line item for franchise?
To a degree, I don't know what that impact will be, but if you have 80 stores that are using lights and air conditioning over the next, in August and paying any other franchise taxes, I think that it's kind of like adding, if we have 8,600 homes in the city of Jenks, it's kind of like adding 80 homes that will probably be use more of the electricity than even the homes use.
Sure, thank you. On line 4140, the miscellaneous, can you help us understand kind of what the past $2 million numbers were miscellaneous and then 100,000? Just,
The 2 million was the ARPA funds, so we
Okay.
received 4 million total, 2 million in the year that you're referencing,
Yep.
so what would be 2023, and then another 2 million in '22. And those were one-time ARPA funds that we used to purchase the ranch.
gotcha, thank you.
And for future, when we get the Excel version of this, can you insert comments on those fields and actually just tell us so we can have answers to questions before we get here?
Well, and Tara has.
I know there might be a
yeah.
footnote somewhere, but is there a footnote for that on?
There is.
Was there? Okay.
It's just tough to fit all this onto one.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay. What was the footnote number? I'm not seeing it.
Well, there
That's-
wasn't one for miscellaneous,
There wasn't.
Yeah, we didn't
okay.
have one for that.
Yeah,
but-
let's.
just because the change was only 5,000.
Yeah. Well, I tend to, my criticism or feedback of the budget process is when we use words like miscellaneous. What is that?
Explain it.
Yeah, let's explain a little bit more. I mean, there's no doubt about it what McDonald's rental income means to anyone who serves here. If we could make sure we have footnotes on some of those. Anything else, Mr. Short?
That's it, thank you.
Can we walk through some of the, on page 5 of 18, when it comes to employees or staff members' increases, if we can just get a summary of, let's start off with city planner, account 241, pretty significant change. Where's that? wait a minute, maybe it wasn't city, hold on a
Well,
minute.
we have the 6% increase in personnel costs related to the raise, but in addition to that, we included the cost of the downtown master plan. So that would be the majority of the
Okay, so that's.
$100,000 increase is related to the downtown master
Okay,
plan.
and you did have a footnote for that, thank you. There was a few there that were really significant. Obviously, uniform patrol, I can certainly understand.
Yeah, and so when we look at the increase in expenses being 1.6 million for the operating cost for Fund 10, the vast majority, about $1 million, is related to the 5 police officers and the 6 firefighters.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have any increases in, and I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to get to this page, in communications? Did we budget for the app that somehow I promised the world?
We have increases in, I don't know if it's in this, if it's with the city or with JPWA, but we do have increases for software.
Where would, so when it comes to communication, which is obviously something we agreed requires continuous improvement, where would we put those increases since Katie's doesn't necessarily have her own category here? Where do we hide that? Where do we put that number?
That's in the
It's
Jenks
in
Public
JP.
Works Authority budget.
Okay. Why? Why is it there?
Because the vast majority of the communication that we have is related to letting citizens know
Works.
about
Okay.
what is capital improvements we have going on. And that's where our Economic Development Fund is as well, so.
Yeah.
We also have money that we've earmarked for marketing the city, and that would be in economic development, which is in the Public Works Authority.
Do you think long-term, we probably need to move communications costs out of JPWA into something a little more, makes a little more sense? It seems like most of our communication is related to a road being closed or this or that, but is the nature of the communication justify the account where it's coming from?
We think so, and it's kind of a balancing act with, we have the city budget, which is what we're looking at today, which the core function is public safety, planning, administration, finance, but we also have the Jenks Public Works Authority that's a separate legal entity that has the responsibility of capital improvements within the city, roads, sewer, stormwater, water distribution, and economic development, and that's funded through the rates that the utility customers pay. And so there's kind of a mutually beneficial relationship between the two in that the work that the city does makes the city more attractive to attract customers for the Public Works Authority utility, which, so if we're marketing the city, we're getting more customers, we're also getting more citizens. The customers pay the utility costs, but they also provide more of a demand for service for our city services such as police and fire.
Do you like it where it's at?
Well,
I mean, if it makes sense to you is all I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, and like you said, it is a balancing act.
Yeah.
You think about it this way, we all do work for all of
For-
the funds, but we're only paid out of one.
Yeah.
So it is that balancing act.
Okay.
and again, the employees paid by the city, such as me, finance, legal, HR, we support the aquarium, but there are no funds dedicated from the aquarium to the city or JPWA for the services provided.
Okay. Any significant, outside of personnel from the police department, any significant or interesting budget requests that we did not account for?
Well, I think there were specific personnel requests that largely related to pay that we viewed as addressed by the 6% increase in pay. And so we looked at all of those individual requests and looked at what the requests were versus what the 6% pay increase would do. And largely, it was a wash, and so we decided to move forward with the 6% pay increase. But beyond that, I think the requests for vehicles, the requests, you know, I'm sure for drones and ammo, other things were included in this budget.
Okay. You happy?
I hope so.
You? You too, sir?
Yeah, as far as I know, yeah.
Okay. You? Are they just gonna always just do this? Is that what we're?
I hope so.
Okay. All right. Because I ask these questions because when you meet with residents and they say you're failing here or you're lacking here, and when we do SWOT analysis and we plan for a strategy, he and I and Donna and John, we know what we don't do well, that what we don't control. And I look at every single penny we spend. It gets back to the basics. Our core responsibilities as a city, whether we agree or not, the state says we provide for public safety roads and we move water here and there. Sewer.
I think we do a great job.
I'm
with that.
channeling my inner Mike Sharp, because he would say, your only responsibility is safety, streets,
We're the safest city in Oklahoma.
drinking water, and all that. So apart from that, when I look at our SWOT analysis, and I think of planning and communicating, I think every dollar we spend, whether it's an employee in this building, are we addressing and meeting the needs of our weaknesses? That's how I look at budget. If this money does not help us fix a problem or turn a weakness into, even if we get weaknesses up to something we'll call neutral, we're making it better, but we're not strong in that area. That's the mindset of how I do this in the corporate world. Are we spending money on solving problems, or are we not? So what are these frivolous dollars? So that's,
And I think the outcome that you would look at to see, are we doing that, is do people want to live here? And if we're, if not the fastest growing, one of the fastest growing communities in Jenks, I think the answer would be we're meeting the needs of residents to the point that more people want to move here.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to that, as it relates to, you know, all those new people generate a demand for service, which increases our expense. So on the other end, what are we doing to offset that expense? Well, we're engaged in economic development. We're a town of 27 or 8,000 people that has 1 billion, just about 1 billion in economic development in the pipeline. I think that we're succeeding in meeting the needs of residents through generating economic development. That's part of what has been council's plan as it relates to not only TIFs, but on a smaller scale, the kitchen grants on Main Street, the facade improvements, all of that. We're doing everything we can to make it not only a better place for people to live by providing great services, but also a better place to do business and be able to pay for those services that we provide.
With limiting the tax increases on our citizens.
Yeah, and that's another thing that we've worked over time. When you look at this budget and you see the revenues and expenses, we're very conservative in our revenues so that we always anticipate we're going to have more revenue than what we budgeted. And on the flip side, we are conservative in our expenses, but also we run a very lean operation, and I think that the expectation of me and of department directors is, even if we have all of these expenses approved, we may not need to expend all these funds, and so at the end of the year, we would have a surplus. So even though you see a fund balance transfer to balance this budget, the expectation is we wouldn't need that. That we would be coming out ahead with revenues as it relates to expenses. And what that allows us to do is have cash on hand to make investments in the community that come up throughout the year from citizens and/or from council. If you look at the fire station, our plan is to fund that through collateralizing cash on hand and getting a 1% interest rate or 1% above the treasury rate. And so most communities would, if they're going to build a new fire station, go out and issue bonds. And so they issue debt that then the citizens have to repay through property taxes. And it's been the policy of council and been the policy of staff to limit property tax or any tax increase to the citizens by being fiscally responsible through our budgeting process. And I think that we've been very successful at that, and that's what's allowed us to have the flexibility to go build a new fire station without increasing residents' taxes.
Tara, were you here when OMAG came and gave us our scorecard on our fiscal house?
I don't think so.
Okay. Let's make sure we get them invited back every month to tell us how great we're doing on that. I think it'd be good for you to have a relationship with OMAG. They kind of come in, and I think Ms. Montgomery may have been here for that, but it's really good to see an outsider, third-party, non-biased perspective that actually reviews and critiques all the municipalities or most of its members in the state of Oklahoma to come in and reiterate what Chris is trying to say to us in different ways, that our fiscal house is in order, and which I think it always has been. And to his point, I think we do operate pretty lean, but I think it would be good for you as you take on this role to have a relationship with those folks and make sure that they get invited back and keep an eye on us as we're moving through. As it relates to the orange items, I noticed the only changes are in utilities. Was there any thought from staff for any increases anywhere else? And you can just answer the yes or no. It doesn't have to be. I see it's commercial building permit fees, but those are not actually increases, they're typos. But the only fee increases were on water, sanitary sewer, and solid waste. Is that easy pickings, or is it just, what was the thought process?
Well, and we'll address that at the JPWA Budget Committee.
Okay,
but
that's fine.
But I can briefly address it here. The City of Jenks Public Works Authority has some of the lowest rates for water, sewer, stormwater, EMSA, trash in the entire metro area. And so when we have the JPWA Budget Committee meeting, you'll see a spreadsheet or chart of basically the average expense for a Jenks homeowner and customer with JPWA versus every other city in the metro. And I think that we are the lowest of every single other city. And at the same time, we're proud of that, but we have to continue to reinvest in our water distribution system and wastewater collection system. And you'll see in our JPWA budget that the cost of doing business as it relates to treating wastewater is just getting more and more expensive. The contractor that we have that manages our wastewater treatment plant, our contract is going up. And so in order to account for that, we have a 7% increase in water distribution fees and a 7% increase in wastewater fees.
So really, these fee increases are more just a pass-through of what the inflated cost to produce is. It's not necessarily a windfall for other operational purposes.
Yeah, from what we're hearing from other suburbs around here, it's not a windfall for anybody.
Right.
So, yeah. Well, since we opened with you, Mr. Short, do you have any other comments or questions before
Can
we
we
move on
move
to
real
Mr.
quick to CapEx? Kind of the outlays in the CapEx. I think it's important for us to, you articulated well kind of our financial health and how we can pay for most of this out of cash or very, very low cost debt financing. So we're going to spend 21.2 million, 21.3 million, I'm on sorry, page 10. In the majority of that's in two things, the fire station, which you addressed, and then the widening of 111th to 131st, the 14 million. Is this 21.2, you've identified the 5 million that we're going to use for our cash as collateral for low financing cost debt. how else are we going to finance or otherwise pay for the balance of the 20, or the 16 million?
So it's the policy of council that, and I'll back up, we collect 3.55% on every retail sale. 0.55 was approved by the voters for use in the vision extension projects, which is the low water dam, sidewalk on Elm Street, sidewalk on C Street, paving the Park West parking lot, all those projects. And those were approved by the voters, so.
When?
In 2016. And so when we collect our sales and use tax, the full 3.55%, so all of the sales and use tax comes to the city. That full amount is transferred to the Public Works Authority. The Public Works Authority then transfers back 2.55%, which would be the Vision Extension Fund money, and then that two number is for operations for the city. So that goes back to the city. Then the Public Works Authority takes 1% of the 3.55 and sends that from Fund 50, which is the JPWA operating fund, to Fund 53, which is our capital improvement fund. And so we collect on average $4 to $5 million in revenue from that 1% on every retail sale. So then we take that amount of money and use that on department's capital improvement requests. So let's say we have $4 million to use every year. This year we had $32 million in requests, and for the next fiscal year it was $52 million. And then we have to decide what are the priorities and what can we afford, and kind of whittle that down. And that's what you see. The vast majority of the 21 million is 14.75 million for the widening of Elm, which is going to be funded through the 2020 bond issue. And the 5 million for the fire station is to be funded through a loan that we plan to take that'll have an effective 1% interest rate because we're collateralizing cash or treasuries. And then the remaining amount of money is, and I don't know if it's actually not Fund 53, but all of these different funds, 27, 30, 32, 33, 45, all of these other funds have dedicated revenue sources, whether it's the hotel motel tax, whether it's building permit fees. So all of these funds have a dedicated income source. Fund 12, which is the capital improvements for the police department, and Fund 14, which is the capital improvement fund for the fire department, are funded through transfers from the operating account of the city, which would be Fund 10. And so, you know, when you look at PD with computers, new vehicle debt payment, car equipment, radar, debt service on existing vehicles, tasers, Glocks, AEDs, all of that is funded through transfers from Fund 10 to Fund 12. And similarly, Fund 14, where you see the fire station, the debt service, those are funded through transfers as well.
Thank you.
Crystal?
Oh, absolutely.
You know, I was thinking, I just remembered this because last year somebody asked me for this. And it would be helpful to council members, anybody. When I go to work on Monday, or actually next week when we talk about our budget, they put everything in pictures. So I had this vision last year and nobody gave it to us. And all I see is at the top, it says 3.55, and it shows a picture of a big mall. And it shows you walking out and you dropped $1, and then the dollar gets cut into 100 pennies. And then 3.55, somehow the arrow flows over here and it goes into Jenks City Hall. Then Chris takes the 3.55 pennies and starts divvying them up, and arrows go here and go there. I only suggest that we look for opportunities to, whether it's for the sake of transparency or educating our public, where these dollars go. I've had a couple of conversations in the last 2 weeks with two previous Jenks mayors who don't like that formula anymore, who think we need to take a half a penny of the half of the .55 and create a dedicated infrastructure fund so we can become less reliant on the state and federal government to build a road around here. I don't know if there's enough pennies to be halved, but all I'm suggesting to you guys is if you look at our council, we got new people, and when Chris says it's the policy of council, most of us won't remember when we created said policy. So if you're not happy with the formula and the way we're cutting the pennies up, and if there's opportunity to discuss doing that in a smarter way, we're open to that discussion. But the general public gets lost and their eyes glaze over, and we talk about 3.55% and where the pennies are going and how they go to this fund and that fund. And if, as soon as you start to say the word authority in a legal entity, you know, nobody wants to listen anymore. But if we have an opportunity to make everybody a little bit, understand this process a little bit better, I think we could do that. Maybe it's called sales tax for dummies, or how cities make money, or where the money goes. And I think we'll create a smarter, more educated public. And we, frankly, the better they get at understanding what we're doing, I look at it as just less questions we have to answer. So if we could come up with a way to be clever about it that doesn't meet the needs of this group here, but meets the needs of the people that typically sit out there, that'd be good.
And the benefit of, you know, there's many downsides to operating on sales tax, but the benefit for the city of Jenks is, and I might add, we have the lowest sales tax of any city in the metro.
Could you give us some context to that?
Broken Arrow has a 3.5% sales tax like we do. Glen Pools is higher, Bixby's is higher,
When you say
Owasso
higher, like?
4% to 4.5%.
Okay, so 25% higher?
Yeah, and so the benefit, though, to the residents is when you have people coming to the aquarium, well, 60% of those people come from further than 50 miles away to visit the aquarium. And our data shows less than 5% of the people that go and spend money at the aquarium are actually from Jenks. So you have people that don't live here paying for the services that we provide to our citizens. And certainly the outlet mall, if they're going to have 6 to 7 million people visiting, but we only have a population of 27,000, all those people visiting, we may contribute less than 1% of the tax that comes to provide the services to the mall, but 99% of the people coming to spend money don't live in this city, and they're not citizens, so they're paying our tax, but they're not our residents, whereas property tax, that's only our residents. And so I think it would be smart in the future to look at, you know, the argument that the people paying this tax aren't actually Jenks residents. The vast majority of them are people that don't live here.
Well, I think that's where it gets back to the whole point that council's had for at least my tenure is economic growth is the key. Economic growth is paramount. And Mr. Mayor, I'll gently push back. I don't think we've always been this healthy. I mean, I would argue that
Well, I
20
would
years,
say
20 years ago.
In his tenure, I think, probably 10 years, I think we've demonstrated some pretty fiscal responsibility.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. I mean, and it's not only fiscal responsibility and restraint, it's a vision of growth and putting together the infrastructure necessary to accommodate that growth. You know, a lot of this, you know, before I came on board, you know, I get frustrated along with every other citizen. Why don't you have a road there? Why do you wait for everything to happen and then the road gets built? And it's all about money at the end of the day. And until you get into this detail and live this for a little while, you know, you don't understand how hard it is to just build out a road and then let everything come to it. We don't have the luxury of that kind of, you know, I mean, I'd love to pave the roads with gold too, but we don't have those kind of resources. And so I think we've managed this thing very well. And the fact that the city has grown, I mean, in 20, 30 years, I mean, we've had, golly, you know, 100+% growth, you know, 200% growth. And that's because we have, a city center and people want to be here. And now we're leveraging that desire with all the economic growth packages that we've put together. I mean, Jada, we just scratched the surface with Jada. That's why we did it 3 years ago, is to create that and fund that and provide those economic development opportunities whereby our citizens don't have to bear, to Chris's point, we don't have to bear the brunt of every luxury that we have. And that's why the economic growth model is so, so important to this, and why some of these CapEx are, just to help sustain that. But the reality is the citizens aren't having to pay for every dollar that we're expending here because of our economic growth. And to me, it's everything. And if you're not, if you're not growing, frankly, you're dying. And we're growing at a rate where, to Chris's point, we're one of the lowest cost, lowest taxed municipalities in the region. And so that's great. We can afford this. How many municipalities have enough cash to finance for 1%? Their brand new state-of-the-art fire station? I'd argue none, maybe one, but I don't know who it is, other than us, right? And so to me, that wasn't an accident. That didn't happen in one fiscal year or 2 fiscal years. It's been a growth trajectory, and so I'm really looking forward to what we can do now that we've got the mall opening in August. And the other thing that I'm not sure is in here, and Terry, you may help us a little bit. I'd be surprised if you built this in, but what's the halo effect? What are the other entities that are just pouring in, wanting to be a part of this, municipality now that we've got the crown jewel, the aquarium's crown jewel, but the retail economic driver crown jewel, and the outlet mall started and is about to open. I mean, I think that this is it's going to pose problems. There's no question about it. That, our public service folks are going to have real issues to deal with. But the reality is that those dollars are coming in are, to Chris's point, not going to be our dollars, and that's a really healthy set of circumstances.
You make a good point. I met a gentleman at a fundraiser last week for Lonnie Sims, and he said, "Mayor, I lived in Jenks 20 years ago, and I remember us screaming at the council and at Mike Tinker and whoever else saying, why can't you build the infrastructure first?" And we hear that question every week in Jenks. Why don't you build the damn road first? And why are you reactive? And he goes, and then I moved to Plano, and I pay a lot of taxes there, and now I know why Texas is different. And he goes, and I'm sorry, it's not your fault. We don't build the road first because there's no money to build the road. Because nobody's sold enough snow cones and burgers yet for us to build the road. And it's a problem that's not going to change unless the state of Oklahoma changes. But good point. And, I also talked to the last 5 mayors of Jenks, and they've said, when the aquarium moved in, we became a destination city, and there's no way to really undo that. The Simon Mall will solidify that for a fact. Those are the 2 biggest draws, other than the gathering place probably in Tulsa County. And we are what we are. So, yeah, and the good news is if you're out there and you're listening and you're a Jenks resident, they're both right. Most of the money it takes to pay the chief to hire more firefighters is coming from people that live outside the area. So it's a unique situation we have. I think we're kind of unique in the whole county. So, but I didn't mean to cut you off. Do you have any more questions or comments on the actual budget? If not, we'll.
Nope, I don't. Thanks.
I've never heard Mr. Brown be silenced for this long, so we'll give you an opportunity, sir, to.
I appreciate that, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I did get the chance to go through the numbers, so I've had a chance to review it. The deltas, the changes in here seemed very reasonable. One thing you didn't mention about the flat sales, it's inflation. And I did have one question that relates back to our cost of living increase. Typically, from a business standpoint, I tend to stay away from COLAs because everything always tends to move to the right, and we look at equilibrium always tends to grow unless there's some major reset. Has personnel done a compensation benefit analysis to see where we're at to market?
Not since I've been here.
Okay, something that we probably ought to do so that we don't become constantly reliant on COLAs. The downside of COLAs is that And there's no objection right now because the COLA is probably not sufficient based upon the current inflation that we're in. So I think we've got to do it.
What does something like that cost? Ballpark versus,
I would expect that OMAG may have the data
Okay.
that's out there, or SHRM won't,
Okay.
and it's readily available online, so it'd be something that we can look at. The downside on COLAs, besides continually moving the demand curve, supply curve to the right, is that when you make those changes, you may have other individuals, performance-wise, that by merit need a higher increase that are no longer in market, whereas other people might move up that are not performing. So it can potentially reward poor performance. So in this particular case, yeah, with inflation, I think it's a good move. It's the right move to do. But
Could I make a comment on
Please,
that?
absolutely.
Because, so, over the last 10 years, I think that we have been more conservative than other communities in across-the-board pay increases. I know we have. But what we allow departments to do is request specific adjustments for specific employees. So if employees are performing well, or if there's a department director or a supervisor that thinks that someone's done a great job, they can request a pay increase outside of the 3 or 6% that we recommend. So we try to account for that in some degree. And I would just say, I've talked for years now about doing some sort of compensation study because, you know, if we have a department director leave, I do the research and understand if I want to hire the best person, how much is that going to cost based on what the surrounding communities or the private sector is paying for that specific position. But, you know, in addition to that, we look at police pay throughout the metro region in the state. We look at fire pay throughout the metro region in the state when we're doing our union negotiations. But when it comes to, like, let's say the aquarium or public works staff, you know, are we continually evaluating what the pay is for a laborer or what the pay is for a biologist? No. But I think last year we adjusted just about everyone's pay on the lower end at the aquarium to increase it to be competitive. But I agree, I think a compensation study would be beneficial. I guess my thought would be, I would expect that whatever the cost of just the study is wouldn't be the cost, because we would get numbers back that show we probably need to be more competitive. I wouldn't be expecting that we'd be reducing anyone's pay, so.
Related to that, the other thing is, if we haven't done a compensation study, just a concern based on projections that I'm seeing from SHRM and other economic sources, when we talk about inflation, we all know that we've got an adjustment coming from Fair Labor Standards Act and the base minimum on salaries. I don't know if HR had the chance to determine how that's going to impact our staff, if we're going to have to move people up as a result.
Yeah.
And then moving people up, then what it does is it potentially crowds salaried employees where they might be supervising someone, and the gap between pay becomes narrower. And then it also creates a gap between hourly employees and salaried employees. All that's to say, the expectation is, unless these proposed legislative changes or regulatory changes are derailed, they will have a direct impact on inflation, which means our expenses will likely be higher in FY25.
Yeah, and we've done an analysis of the employees that are exempt that make less than what the new exemption level would be, and do we think they're working overtime? Does it make economic sense to move them, you know, from either exempt to non-exempt, or does it, you know? So we've talked about it, and I talked with Tara, I talked with our HR director, and we think that we haven't made a decision on all those employees, but we think that this budget can accommodate those decisions.
Okay, good. The only other thing, and Mr. Short identified this, one of the things I'd be curious about is on our CapEx, when we see the funds, I'd like to see or get an idea of either fund balances in the future or projections of what those fund balances will be, so that when we see a $21 million expenditure, it will be an indication, are we going to have to do anything externally with taxation or other things to generate those funds, or does it mean we may have to put CapEx expenditures off? So do we have those funds to cover the 21? So fund balances would be good.
And I think as a part of the official budget document, we do have fund balance information as it relates to the beginning of the year, expected expenditures, and where the fund balance would be at the end of the year, should we expend all those funds and receive the revenue. I think for the purpose of this meeting, the full budget's 400 pages.
Right.
And so we're trying to make this as kind of high level. But I agree, and Counselor Short had asked me about the fund balances as well, but you will see those.
Following the mayor's recommendation about OMAG, I think one of the things that would be beneficial, not only for budgeting standpoint, but also from a performance standpoint with council, is if Tara can maybe get with OMAG and see if there's operating ratios that are based on peers, other municipalities our size. I like to look at operating ratios. Again, Mr. Short would be familiar with CAMEL ratios, and they're a good dashboard to tell us whether we're on track or not. And I would expect that there's got to be those same ratios out there for municipalities that would be, again, it gives us something at a high level that we can look at very quickly and know if we're on track, off track.
Crawford, who prepares our financial statements, offers something similar to that, where they take revenues, fund balances, expenditures, debt capacity, all of those things, and they call it a performator. And we had provided that to council for a few years, and I think it was largely the same every year, but we're extremely fiscally sound. But that's one thing that we can ask Crawford to provide to the council in the coming months. And you'll get the annual audit, I think.
It's at Elfring, so.
Yeah.
I remember that now. You talk about it. Was it just a rating, a grade between, what, 1 and 100?
I think it was 1 in 10.
Okay.
And the overall, I mean, they have an overall performance measure, and then they break it down by specific metrics. And so we'd be happy to get that to you.
Thank
I
you.
think that'd be really helpful just from the communication perspective Mayor mentioned. I mean, if you can put it in pictures as graphed and, it's very high level, consistent, I think that would be very helpful for not only council, but citizens to understand.
I agree. Anything we can do to ease the understanding of this data, and Tara, you've adopted I think a format that was probably in place.
Correct.
When you look at this, if you have the ability to talk your language, and then you can also turn around and explain it to your kid, let's do that very same thing for the residents that we have here. I remember when I first started going into these budget committee meetings, and we all looked at each other, and we looked at Mr. McCork, and we were like, what is he talking about? And it's just endless seas of Excel documents and trying to go back and forth and which column's which, and then you walk out with an Excedrin migraine. You're heading to Walgreens right away trying to figure out where the next painkiller is. So anything we can do, it makes us better too, and that's a good thing. So I'll take any closing comments for you, Mr. Brown, Mr. Short,
None here.
Tara,
None for me.
Mr. Shrout. Well, thank you guys very much for putting this together for us. All I ask is we just get better at this every year. Small things we can do to make this easier, to make it more concise. I'm actually pretty impressed. It's not even 12:30 yet, and I know in the past we've taken quite a bit longer to get through some of this. So appreciate the hard work that you've done, and certainly appreciate you for the situation that you were put in to get this done, and hope you can breathe easy for a little while.
After next week.
After next week? Yeah? Yeah, okay. Well, if you need anything, ask him. You better tell me if she needs anything. Tell somebody, okay?
I will.
But we appreciate the hard work. Thank you all very much. We are on item number 2. Gentlemen, this is the recommendation to the Jenks City Council that the fiscal year 2024-2026 biennial budget and these documents be implemented. We can do this with a motion from either one of you.
Make a motion to approve.
Second?
Thank you. We have a proper motion and a second. There will be no debate on this motion, so we can go ahead and vote, please.
Brown?
Yes.
Short?
Yes.
Mayor Box?
Yes, and for the public to know that there's maybe some internal debate on whether or not this is a public meeting. This is a committee meeting. There is no quorum of council members here. We choose to have this meeting in a public setting. Everyone is welcome to come, but you obviously saw today that we did not open this to public comment. So the difference between this is a committee, and that is kind of how we're going to do it going forward. And don't remember when we started, that doesn't matter. So most committee meetings, simply for the sake of logistics and the fact that more people are interested, will probably be held in this room for the benefit of the public. So thank you for those of you that are interested that do attend. And without further ado, it is 12:30.